Bookseller Crow on the box. Tales from an empty bookshop.
Good evening and welcome to the latest in our Talks from an Empty Bookshop. Tonight we welcome Phil Earle and Michael Wagg here to talk about Edgar and Adolf, their YA 11 plus novel about a very special relationship, football relationship, and a history. Phil has been publishing books for just over 10 years, I think now, haven't you, Phil?
Yeah, I have, mate. Yeah.
And Michael, as well as being an actor, has the distinction of being only the first person to appear twice on on the Bookseller Crow box.
Brilliant.
So, who wants to talk a little bit about your book first?
Should we tell you where the idea came from?
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, Waggy, you go. Go on. You're better at this than me.
No, you start. You do it. You do it, man.
Well, it started. I'm a bit obsessed with like the tiny nuggets of life that can inspire a book. It's when I go into schools and stuff, it's the thing I always talk about, how the simplest, most mundane episode in everyday life, something that seems really humdrum, can be the start of an amazing adventure. And this book kind of epitomizes that for me, because it started with this, really. We both have one. It started with that badge. And as you know, I lived in the Palace for about 15, 16 years. Me and Waggy met at university in Hull in 1993 and have been good friends ever since. And I can't remember if we were in Damali. You think we were in Damali, don't you?
I think it was what was called Damali Cafe, yeah.
And I walked in and we were having a spot of lunch or something, and I spotted the badge on Waggy's cap. And I said to Waggy, who's that? And instantly he had a story for me, really. And I'll let Waggy tell you about the story because he's much more versed in it.
Well, the face on the cap is the face of a young footballer called Edgar Kail. He played for Dulwich Hamlet in, I think his first match was 1915, but he played throughout the 1920s and into the 1930s. And he is the biggest hero still today. For the Dulwich Hamlet fans, that after Phil spotted this badge, he said, "Tell me more." And the first thing I think I told him was that every match at Dulwich Hamlet these days, still now, home or away, the fans sing for Edgar, which is pretty remarkable. He was playing 100 years ago, and he finished playing, 80, 85 years ago, whatever it is. But they still sing for him. He's an absolute hero. The road leading to the Dulwich Hamlet Stadium, Champion Hill, is called Edgar Kail Way. He has that road named after him. So these were the first, and I didn't know a huge amount about him, other than the fact that he is this great Dulwich Hamlet player. He was the last non-league player to play for the full men's England team, as opposed to the England amateur team. Again, a remarkable achievement. So I told, the next day, I think, after we had that meal, I told Phil a few bits and pieces like that. And Phil is an absolute master. I've realised over the years in spotting, as he says, where a story might start. And I could feel his ears pricking up. That I knew that he was interested. So, and I sort of toyed with the idea of writing something about Edgar. But I didn't know what it might be, and I've never written fiction before, prose fiction. I've written poetry and plays and non-fiction. But I thought maybe I'll write something about Edgar. But once I could see Phil's interest, I think it was pretty obvious to both of us fairly early on that this was a story that we would write together, and that it probably would be fiction. My first stab at fiction, and Phil is a master. So I think we pretty much knew that. I don't know whether we were looking for something to write together, Phil. It's hard to know, isn't it?
We talked about it. Waggy wrote a poem for me that appeared at the start of one of my books called a book called Heroic. And, Waggy's a very versatile writer. He can turn his hand to any, whether it's poetry, prose, plays, journalism, you know, he's done it all. So it would always been in my head that I'd love to do something with him. And this seemed like the obvious one. I had a real kind of visceral reaction to that story, you know, that thing of goosebumps, John, you know, for me, when a story grabs you, it burrows under your skin quite quickly. And the thing that cemented it was the fact that Hamlet have got this brilliant relationship between themselves and a club in Hamburg called Altona 93. And they had a similar player to Edgar called Adolf Jager, who played for them throughout his career. He'd been, again, a non-league player that had represented Germany, but he'd also played for Germany at the Olympics as well, from what Waggy had told me. So it seemed like there was this brilliant, almost like, you know, mirror between the two clubs. And there's this wonderful friendship between the two clubs that exists. So it all felt really, it felt like it fell on our laps, really. And to top that off without being a sentimental old sod, it's that thing of, there's nothing better if you're going to write a book with one of your closest friends to write a book about friendship. So we literally just said, okay, what if, we know that Edgar played against Adolf in 1925, Waggy, that's right, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we know they played against each other then, but we don't think there was much crossover after that. But that's the beautiful thing about writing. It was a springboard. Okay, so let's say, what if they met when Edgar was a young lad on his first tour away with the Hamlet? And what if they managed to influence each other, not just through their careers, but through their subsequent lives? So that was the nugget, wasn't it? That's where it started. And it escalated quite quickly. I think we were both really, really excited by the potential of it, you know, and it felt, I think, to both of us, it was one of those things that got your heart beating a little bit, which is always a really good sign, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, to me, it feels like there are so many different sort of levels or layers or whatever of friendship in this, because mine and Phil's friendship is real and has lasted 28 years now, I think. There is this real friendship between fans of the two clubs, Dulwich Hamlet and Altona 93. Lots of different friendships that have emerged, and they are the result of two particular fans, one from each club, very special people. An Altona fan called Jan Sturver, and a Dulwich fan, the great Dulwich fan, Mishi Morath, who sadly died just over a year ago, and he's a great loss to the club. But it was a chance meeting between those two 10 years ago that out of which all these other friendships are born, because they dug away at the record books and discovered that this match had happened between Dulwich and Altona in 1925. Fairly randomly, Dulwich were on a tour of Germany playing 3 matches, and one of them was at Altona. But the fact that Mishi, this Dulwich fan, he went to Altona because they were founded in 1893, the same year as Dulwich. He was wandering around Europe looking for clubs that were founded in 1893, as is the wont of some football fans to do those sorts of things. I've done a similar thing myself recently. But just by wandering around that ground one winter match, he bumped into Jan, and from there the real and modern and lasting friendship exists. So there's all these levels of friendship, and then as Phil says, it just felt the natural thing to imagine, what if after that 1925 match a friendship developed between these two players at different stages in their career, and there was something that was going to be an obstacle to that, be a huge and horrific obstacle to that as the Second World War approached, and they both became aware of that.
It's also interesting to contrast their careers with careers of modern day footballers as well, because both, it seems, chose to stay with the single club that they played for all of their sporting careers.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, isn't it? You know, that notion of, you know, Man United fans make a big deal about how they still, you know, big deal about the fact they still sing for Cantona week in, week out. And that's a brilliant thing that they can do that. But, you know, we're not talking about United or Bayern Munich. We're talking about Dulwich Hamlet, how many divisions below those top levels. And I think they're two very, very special clubs in that. And you know, the story, a very brief story, I think that epitomizes that best. A few seasons ago, Dulwich's away kit was Altona's home kit and vice versa. You know what I mean? It sums up, you know, people make a big deal about, oh, well, you know, especially in the pro ranks, we're a family club. We're all about the community. And actually Palace are, I think, a good community club. But places like Hamlet, you know, the sense of community cuts much deeper. Sure. And so, again, it felt really great to be able to celebrate this guy or these two men who represented one club. You know, you go to Old Trafford now and there's the statue outside of Best, Charlton and Law, but they all played for other clubs as well. Do you know what I mean? I mean, this guy, Edgar Kail, deserves way more than just a street named after him, you know?
I think that connection as well is so fan-led. The other special thing about these clubs, and it's true of lots of clubs at the lower leagues in non-league, the fans drive it forward, and all the initiatives that have happened between these two clubs, like the swapping of the away kits and a recent match, a rematch of the 1925 match happened in 2018. The score was exactly the same, so they were looking down on that one. But all that stuff is fan-led by some brilliant people at both clubs. I should Dulwich is very much Edgar's club, and Altona is Adolf's club, but they did turn out for other clubs in reality. I think Adolf played for a different Altona club before Altona 93 briefly. Edgar signed amateur terms with Chelsea. I don't think he played, but then I think he did appear once for Queen's Park in Scotland. Our story takes us to Scotland. I think he played against Rangers in some sort of I don't know, it's a testimonial or a charity match or something for Queen's Park. But in spirit and in their legacy, they had one club. They were one club people.
Do you want to read some for us?
Yeah. We'd love to. Shall I preface it, Wag?
Yeah, man.
So this is what we thought we'd read you is basically Adolf and Edgar's first meeting. So to set the scene, it's the night before Good Friday, 1925, in a freezing cold Hamburg. And young Edgar Kail is on his first tour with the club. He's very much just starting to appear in the first team. And he's decided that he wants to go and get some practice on the pitch where he's going to play the next night. So he begs the groundsman to put on half of the floodlights for him so he can go out there and practice. And begrudgingly, the old man does. And this is what happens next. As he stepped into the floodlit half of the pitch, Edgar felt the buzz of excitement he got every time he played for his Hamlet. He was 17 years old, and every game was his biggest yet. Edgar had to make sure he was ready for the match tomorrow. And so he began, swinging in a cross from the right, which dropped sweetly between the penalty spot and the 6-yard line. The only problem with the drill was that Edgar had just one ball. So after each cross, he was forced to jog to the other side of the pitch and dribble it back again. The leather ball was also growing heavier in the wet, testing his skill.
But Edgar didn't let that get in the way. He practiced hard. Cross after sweet cross flew in with just the right pace and whip. Edgar allowed himself a smile as he pictured Hamlet's centre forward, big Sid Nicol, getting on the end of his crosses tomorrow. But still he didn't stop. He wasn't satisfied and he carried on. The grey sock on his right leg slipped down to his ankle. There was silence apart from the thwack of each cross, then silence again. It was so quiet, most people would have heard the creak of the rusty gate at the south entrance, but Edgar was focusing so hard he didn't notice. Even if he had looked round, he wouldn't have been able to see another man walk through the gate and stand in the dark half of the pitch. The man was at least 10 years older than Edgar and was feeling a bit rusty, like that gate which the groundsman was always promising to oil but never got round to. The man was here for a bit of practice too before tomorrow's match, shooting practice. On Edgar went, cross and collect, criticising himself when he didn't deliver perfection, smiling a little when he landed 3 good crosses in a row.
When the 4th cross left Edgar's boot, something different happened, something beautiful. As the ball flew into the area, Edgar saw a figure dart from the shadows. It was another player wearing a different kit. The man sprinted forwards. His black, white and red hooped shirt a blur of lines. Edgar watched as the player bent his run slightly to correct the timing and hit the edge of the box just as the ball arrived. The figure leapt, pulled his neck back for power and boom, his forehead met the ball, somewhere between a kiss and a punch, and it rocketed into the roof of the empty net. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Then silence again. Edgar stood still, his eyes wide. He pulled up his grey sock and looked at the newcomer. He was an older man, 10, 15 years older maybe, without a hair on the top of his head. But he was some player. Edgar could tell that from just one header. The older man looked at Edgar, breathing deeply, then made a slight movement with his hands, a fast, silent clap, as if to say, very good.
Then he fetched the ball from the back of the net, threw it out to the right wing and returned to his starting point outside the box. Edgar collected the ball and set himself to send in another cross. He whipped it in, and the older man was already on his way, timing his run to hit the penalty spot at the perfect time. Edgar's cross was lower this time, but the man shuffled his feet and swept his right boot to send it screaming into the bottom corner. Again, he fetched the ball and this time threw it back with a wink. For the next 20 minutes, they formed an unexpected but instinctive partnership. The young lad in pink and blue and the older man who had appeared from nowhere. The cross to the perfect spot, the timed run followed by a header or volley, leaving the back of the net bulging. Fetch the ball, throw it back to the wing, go again. The cross came in, boom, goal. Fetch the ball, throw it back. Not a word was spoken. Half the pitch in darkness. It was like the older man knew exactly where Edgar was going to land each cross. And this excited Edgar, made him realise he was in the company of someone very special. They continued until the cold and damp became too much for both of them, and then headed toward the changing rooms.
At the tunnel, the old man held out a hand. Adolf Jager, he said. Edgar thrust his hand out as the penny dropped. So this was Jager, the Altena striker. Edgar's teammates had told him repeatedly that this was the danger man in tomorrow's match. Give him an inch and he'd score a hatful, they'd said. And Edgar had seen that tonight, firsthand. Edgar Kail, he replied. Edgar felt suddenly slightly nervous, though he had no need to be. Adolf placed his other hand on top of Edgar's and shook it warmly. I know, said Adolf. Edgar's heart raced. How did he know? How had Adolf even heard of him? He was just a kid. It is a shame you will not be crossing for me tomorrow, said Adolf. Edgar looked down at the muddy touchline. In his head, he agreed. Imagine the score, he thought, if they were on the same side. They shook hands a second time and walked to their changing rooms on opposite sides of the tunnel. Edgar's mind turned again to the game tomorrow, the biggest game of his life so far.
Excellent. Excellent. So now you've got your lip in as a writing duo. Are there further projects on the horizon?
We hope very much so. I mean, sort of backtracking a tiny bit, this is just an absolute pleasure for me. I love the fact that we're doing this, not least because when Phil lived in these parts, many of his early book launches were there at the Crow, and we all remember those events so fondly, and we're so proud of Phil and his early writing, and to now be on this together, I can't tell you how much it means to us both. And the clubs obviously mean a lot to me, and Dulwich does too to Phil. But the fact that our friendship has led to this point is such a special thing. It means a huge amount. If only we could have one of those do's, could have done this in the shop there, and, had some Beck's beer and etc. But at Phil's do's, it was always my job to pass around a copy of the book for everyone there to sign it for him, which is a lovely idea. And if we to do that now, I wouldn't have to do that. We could get someone else to sign.
I'd do it, Waggy. It's my turn then.
But yeah, the writing process was an absolute pleasure, and we're so proud to have done it together. So yes, I think we are looking for what might be the next story, but I think it has to hit as hard as that little badge of Edgar Kail did in terms of the nugget of the story. I don't know how you feel about that, Phil.
Yeah, I mean, the writing of it, you know, this is the second time I've collaborated. I've done those 2 books with Andy McNabb, but this was a very different relationship, you know, because obviously Andy's just, off on other parts of the world doing mental, crazy, amazing things. And me and Waggy don't have that lifestyle. We're both in our respective houses. So, you know, writing it together, Waggy would come up for long weekends and we would walk. I mean, I live in a very hilly place up in West Yorkshire, and we would take the dog and we would walk and we would walk and we would talk. And I'm not a planner when I write at all. I usually write by the seat of my pants. And this is the only time really that I've, really stuck to a rigorous structure. But actually, I absolutely loved it. And what was fascinating as well, because what we didn't know was how we were, because this isn't a dual narrative novel. There aren't 2 voices going in, which makes that collaboration easier. This is one voice. And so managing, for me, one of the great joys was realizing after 2 or 3 chapters, because we divvied the chapter up. It wasn't like I'd do 1, Waggy would do 2, I'd do 3, he'd do 4, but we knew which ones we were going to write. And it became very evident very quickly that there was one voice. And that was really exciting, because then you really feel like you're onto something, because you're not having to tread on each other's toes or feel worried about upsetting each other. You know, we would write, swap, edit, come back. And although we had to rewrite it, how many times were you in the end? 4?
Yeah, 3 main drafts, I think, weren't there? But
we had to rewrite it 3 or 4 times, but it felt fresh each time, and it was really joyful experience to do that, as I say, with one of your oldest mates. Not many people have that joy. So, you know, there has to be another, because I think we worked too well not to, really.
This is it. It's got a lovely pace to it, and kind of cohesion. I'd almost want to suggest it could be a radio play or something. Very easily it could be turned into that, or even a graphic novel as well. I think would be quite an interesting thing for it to do. But you know, you could I don't know. I mean, there are lots of partnerships in writing, but not many in kind of novel writing or whatever. I mean, you know, you think of Galton and Simpson or whatever. You know, I mean, where people kind of fire off each other, and we're obviously good friends for a long time as well. You know, yeah, it would be nice to think that you would find another nugget somewhere to.
I wonder why there aren't more as well, because as Phil said, it was a lot of fun, and we worked very quickly. And there's a lovely set. I mean, Phil's written loads of brilliant books, so I was learning from him the whole time, and he was helping me through a lot of it. But
someone's at the door. Keep talking.
And there was a lovely sense of waiting for Phil to give me a draft of a chapter to see what he'd come up with, and particularly the end of the chapter, to see where that might lead me. It was like him opening a little door, or a little, in fact, opening that door right behind him, as if to say, "Come in here and take my, I don't know, suggestion of where it might go next, or my provocation, or wherever it might be." There was a lovely sense, literally, of opening doors, like Phil's just done, in a beautiful demonstration of where the next chapter might go to. But I used to wait, excitedly for Phil to send a draft of a chapter. I'd read it thinking I was going to edit it, but I wouldn't, because his first drafts are brilliant. Annoyingly so, he's got brilliant first draft. But then I'd take that into Crystal Palace Park, and I'd sit on a bench there, and I'd immediately, as quickly as I could after reading his chapter, try and write the next one. And then sling it back to him to do the same. So it meant it was quick, and it meant I think we were responding to each other in a very helpful way. So I think it can work extremely well.
Yeah, I mean, look at the way the Americans have and the British as well. But I mean, Americans, you know, with a lot of the great sitcoms of the last 20, 30 years, it's not just a duo; it's a team. Absolutely. You know, and I don't know whether it's people don't know if it's part of the snobbery around literature that people think that diminishes it somehow if there's more than one mind going to it. But for me as a reader, I just want to be taken on the best story imaginable, you know. So sometimes I think, especially if there's a good connection between the two writers, I think it can work incredibly well. Yeah, absolutely.
Should add that I don't think we've sort of mentioned it, but this story, if it's not already apparent, our tale is very much a fictional tale inspired by the real lives of Edgar and Adolf. So those people, fans of the two clubs, for example, who might be looking for the facts, some of them are there, but they're not all there. And we gave ourselves permission to ask that question that Phil said: what if they became friends? What if they played some other matches against each other? So it's ours is very much a fictional tale, but I hope it'll encourage people to go and look at what there is written in terms of non-fiction about them, in terms of the facts of their own life, because they're well worth reading up on. But that's my disclaimer to any Dulwich or alternate fans watching. But having said that, I think I know that we intended it to be a celebration of them, and it's written with the utmost respect for those real lives. So I hope somehow we're true to the spirit of them by trying to bring them to life for young readers, which was our job on this.
Brilliant.
I think the only other thing we could, one last thing to add, if it's possible, just to talk about the fact that this was who it was written for, which is, I mean, we really hope that this, for me, if this is the sort of thing that I would love to watch on a Sunday night, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For me, it's got all those attributes that, there's great things like Goodnight, Mr. Tom, for example, that have been made into great sort of that TV drama sort of thing. But this book was, and this was something that we were very aware of from its very inception, is that we wanted to write it for Barrington Stoke. And Barrington Stoke, for people that don't know about them, they are very small, as in number of people that work for this company up in Edinburgh. And they are the definitive publishers of books for not just dyslexic readers, but also reluctant readers as well. And I've been lucky enough to do, I can't even read, I think this is like my 5th book with them. And they are absolutely extraordinary at what they do. The rigor with which they edit you, they want to make sure that each and every story that they publish is absolutely right for the readers, because there's nothing worse. Dyslexic and reluctant readers already feel like the door to reading has been slammed in their face. So they are absolutely rigorous in making sure that every book that has their logo on the spine is right, and approachable and readable. And so this is an exciting new collaboration that Barrington Stoke have put together with Oxford University Press in what OUP call their super readable roller coasters. And the thing about Barrington Stoke is, as well, for me personally, it's an honor to write for them, because a lot of the greatest writers that have written in the UK are on their list. Do you know what I mean? For me, it's like a who's who. There's David Almond, and there's Kevin Brooks, and there's Anthony McGowan, Lisa Thompson. The list just goes on and on and on and on. And so to write for them, it's a real skill as well, because you have to really pare the story down. And so Waggy and I were really aware from word go that we wanted there to be an approachability and an accessibility, and a readability about the book. And that took a lot of work, because the first draft was, one minute you were in 1980, the next minute you were in 1925, the next day it was 1940. Do you know what I mean? It was jumping everywhere. It was too much. So I think that was a really good exercise for us, wasn't it, Waggy, in distilling the story?
Yeah. And that idea of one voice, the cross coming in, trying to get something on the end of it, but also the roller coaster. It's a right roller coaster following clubs like Dulwich Hamlet. It certainly has been in recent years, and probably all clubs, I would say. We wanted to tell that, to try and replicate that, the excitement of that, and an adventure story. In the book, we have a teenage hero who's on a mission. That became more and more important as we wrote, I think. And
go on, Phil. The beautiful thing, just to add in, is that it all came back to the badge, That was the nicest bit of it was when, as Waggy quite rightly said, the story also has a third character, really, or third main character, which is Adolf's grandson, who's trying to return something very, very precious and very, very special, but very, very small and mundane looking. And it's a badge. It all came back to the badge. So again, it was like this lovely big circle, Waggy, really, wasn't it? Of it all just seemed to mesh together beautifully.
Yeah, and the next step of that, which we can't do, but I know we can't wait to be able to do, is to get to the clubs and share it a bit more with them. You know, try and celebrate the story with them if we can, do events if they want them, and that sort of thing. And then also to get into schools. Obviously we'll do that when we can, and we may do some of that online. But that sharing it with, because it feels like on the one hand there are the football fans of these clubs who are going to be interested in this story, but then there's the school audience who many of them may never have heard of these clubs. Wouldn't be surprised if they hadn't. So to get out and about and to do some stuff on both fronts will be brilliant, won't it?
Yeah, amazing. And if we can get people into the shop, John, and ply them with enough Becks, they might buy a second copy anyway. So it's win-win.
Yes. Is there a bookshop in Hamburg that
Good question.
You could do
there's many. I don't know specific ones, but Altona, the used to be a town in itself, and now is an area of Hamburg near the river. It's in some ways it's not dissimilar to East Dulwich. I have to be honest. There's a sort of gentrification that's happened there. There's it's wondering about it. It doesn't feel dissimilar. So I'm sure there are independents for a start who might take something. But they've also got the club have got a brilliant clubhouse. It feels like a little pub. It is a little pub. Unlike any I've seen in this country, really, as a clubhouse. It's a great place. So my dream would be to go in there and wave the book about and does anybody want to hear this? And they will all turn away, but I'll read anyway. We'll read anyway. We'll read through the chanting to make us stop. But no, it's a wonderful place, and as welcoming as Champion Hill is, the spirit of the clubs is very similar. So I can't wait to do some of that. But also, as I say, schools, because Phil does a lot of work in schools, and I have in terms of theatre work, but not in this way. So I'm looking forward to that stuff.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well,
stickers and badges. Stickers and badges, get them here.
Yes, stickers, badges, signed copies. Although I'm going to have to start sending you some more book plates, but I'll do that.
Amazing.
Cheers.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, John.
Thank you.
It's a brilliant book. It's lovely. It's yeah. I mean, the amount of effort that's gone into it, you can clearly see it's very composed, and really lovely. Yeah.
Thank you. Waggy was always very composed on the ball, mate. So it kind of feels right. Yeah.
You were a bit more of a terrier, I imagine.
Box to box, box to box.
I was a pain in the arse. I just talked a lot.
Okay, yeah, that was great, and
thanks, John.
Willa will edit it up and probably put in some leaking roof footage.
They can find you a book for your girlfriend, your husband, your girl, or your boy. And if you've got a need for an uplifting read, Justine and Jonathan can pick out a book you'll enjoy. What a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. What a book, what a book at the Bookseller Crow on the hill. Crystal Palace Hill, it is. But you can order online.